Welcome, seeker, to Mystic Praxis, a charming podcast at the crossroads where the eclectic meets the divine. Join us as we play with integrating spiritual pathmaking and modern culture to make our everyday lives more mindful, mystical, and magical, and to share what we learn along the way. Whether you're a longtime skeptic or down for some full-on witchy woo-woo, this lo-fi, high-vibe series has got you covered. Hey Praxians, welcome back to Mystic Praxis. This is Allie, and we are on episode number 2. You have no idea how relieved I still am to have gotten past the first episode and into number 2. So I was asking some friends what I should chat about when in this second episode, and one of them gave the very wise advice of, you can never go wrong with seasonal content. And I thought, whew, juicy, because there are so many seasons we could be considering. So today's topic is seasons, cycles, rituals, and habituals. And we're going to talk a little bit about their role in mysticism and spirituality, and also how we as contemporary folk can use them to make our lives better. So what I mean when I say there are multiple ways to interpret seasons is I'm recording this just after we have left the Mercury retrograde, although, to be honest, I still feel a little bit of Mercury retrograde hanging around, and happy to blame all things that befall me on the alignment of the stars and planets, which is one way we could think about seasons or cycles, which is the solar system and how things move in a predictable way, but you get certain sort of seasons. So we've moved out of Mercury grade into Leo, and that is one way we could think about cycles. Another could be that in addition to leaving Mercury retrograde, we also just had a new moon. In fact, I think it was the second new moon of August, which makes it special. I think it has a special name like a black moon or something like that. But moon cycles are another way that we could kind of think about cycles or seasons. So, of course, there is 28 days in a moon cycle, and there's about 13 of them in a year. And just as we have a new moon, which is, when you can barely see it, then the moon waxes, becomes full, wanes, and then the season starts again with a, wait for it, new moon. That's another type of seasons. Finally, we also, in addition to leaving Mercury retrograde and having dealt with a second new moon in August, we also have the sort of wheel of the year type season. So if you are in a Western esoteric tradition, you may have just celebrated Lunasa or Lammas, which I understand some traditionalists think they're very different, but in both cases, you're sort of dealing with the sort of mystical myths around the seasons changing, seasons here on Earth. So, of course, depending on where you live, if you are in the U.S., for example, you're probably dealing with the height of summer. But yet it is the height of summer, and yet it's starting to feel like we're getting towards the end of summer. And so what's happening at the end of summer in the traditional wheel of the year, which is tied to agrarian myths and cycles, would be the first harvests. So you can kind of, in your mind's eye, you think, okay, end of July, beginning of August, you think of sort of these golden fields of wheat and some beautiful flowers and things coming to being flourishing and also sort of harvesting those things in the high heat. There is a lot of food festivals and state and county fairs and things of that nature that all happen around this time as well. And then the last sort of shifting over I will mention related to seasons and cycles is we have shifted from July to August. So very simple, 12 months in the year, 7 days in the week, but of course they are the same months in the same order every year and same days of the week every week. But some things take on special significance depending on what your spiritual practice is or your religion or simply where you were brought up. Because when I got all excited about the seasons, but when I asked my friend, well, what were you thinking of when you meant seasonal content? And what she meant was a very modern take on what I would describe as the wheel of the year, which is it is the end of summer and we are headed into back to school season. So certainly, I wish I was getting ready to take the bus to Hogwarts or the train, but back to school is certainly one of the, it creates a cycle, it creates a pattern and a predictability, and you can actually feel the change in the weather. You can feel the change in the rhythm of the day. If you are a student or a teacher, you know that you had this blissful break, unless you were working all summer, which many of my teacher friends do, but you have this sort of break and then you get started again. One of the things that I think is kind of interesting too, as sort of a side note, is that when we become adults, we actually lose touch with a lot of those cycles in the modern world because for a long time, that whole school year really did define our lives. And I have really wonderful memories, most from childhood, related to summer. And I kind of wonder if the sentimentality of those times has to do with the fact that they were things that happened every year, like lying on the roof of a car in the parking lot of the baseball field and seeing sort of the sparks from the fireworks kind of land all around me is sort of a treasured memory, and it happened summer after summer, or making s'mores sort of happened summer after summer. And there are other traditions throughout the year, but I think part of what makes them special is, although the context changed a little bit, the actual rituals, if you will, were things that happened on a regular basis and that I look forward to. So put a pin in that. We're going to come back to that again, because I want to talk a little bit about one of the things that sort of makes cycles and seasons useful in a mystical context, and that has to do with if you use seasonality or cycles in your practice. Part of the reason why you would do that is because different seasons have a different energy associated with them. Different cycles can have different aspects of them that you might be able to leverage or work off of when you are doing some kind of inner work, whether it is purely spiritual or, whether it is just personal, some kind of personal development. So what I mean by that is, let's leave astrology aside, because that is intensely complicated and not actually one of the things that I'm an expert in, although I am getting my natal chart read, so I will be talking about that on a future episode. But what we can all, I think, relate to without getting in all of the math and mythology of astrology is simply things like the wheel of the year. So the idea of the wheel of the year is, of course, you have, what do we have? You start the year in winter, and then you move into spring, and then you have autumn, and then you have winter, and you start over again. And you can imagine in your head how that, of course, is tied to an agrarian calendar, because in the winter the land is fallow and cold. And then in spring, you begin planting. In summer, you harvest. And then in the autumn, in the summer, things actually grow and you begin to harvest at the end of the summer, and then fall is when, as things sort of die down, the harvesting ends and you prepare for winter. And that, of course, happens every year. So when we're talking about the energy of the seasons, if you think of the seasons as having markers, so markers of the seasons being the spring and fall equinox, and then the summer and winter solstices, and we think about the energy associated with them, well, the summer solstice is the longest day, it's warm, there's lots of creative energy crackling in the air, right? You can kind of imagine that summer vacation energy, that top of the world, let's go to a musical festival kind of energy. And it's, of course, the longest day. So you can stay out, you can get up early, you can stay out late, and you have sunshine, or, depending on where you live, you have light. However, in the winter solstice, it's the shortest day. Folks tend to move a little more slowly. They tend to want comfort by staying at home. The energy is lower. Thoughts turn inward. The energy is more directed towards, let's say, intellectual pursuits than necessarily like getting on out there and partying. Where there are parties, they're often like close gatherings. You can kind of imagine folks bundling up in coats or getting under blankets and sitting in front of a crackling fire at a fireplace or something. These sort of slower type energy, which is almost a waiting energy, because you're trying to get to the spring equinox, which is all about potential. And then, of course, on the other end, you have the fall equinox, which is about gathering oneself for the winter, ending summer and transitioning to winter. And then the folks who follow the Wheel of the Year, they have sort of a whole mythological construct that would align with this cycle of, sort of things underground, cold, getting ready, and then new life in the spring, the height of life and energy in the summer, and then the sort of harvest and letting the ground go fallow of autumn. And there you can tie lots of different types of myths to that, and we can actually see some of those myths peeking out in festivals and holidays from multiple religions, and even some secular holidays. So example, Easter, right in the spring, a lot of fertility and growth, right? Bunnies and eggs and things like that. Or, Day of the Dead in the fall, as things are sort of going from life to the coldness of death, or getting ready for rebirth kind of a thing. Or let's look at a secular holiday like 4th of July. It's like right in the middle of the summer. There's fireworks and picnics and revelry. So you can kind of see how the energy of the holiday matches the energy of the season. And the reason why this is sort of interesting for spiritual practice or personal development is that you can attune what you are working on to the energy that is around you, and maybe that will be helpful to you. So an example, for personal development, let's say, is in the summer, that's when you want to like get out and be active, and maybe you want to try new things, and you want to go out and meet people, because it's that high energy spirit of revelry. In the winter, maybe you want to turn inward, read some books, journal and sketch, and think about what you want to accomplish in the coming year. So the work that you're doing, you can align to the energy of the season. And the correspondences of the different seasons make sense because it's not just a human construct or framework applied on a year. It is based on what nature is doing. It is based on what we do as a sort of a society through those seasons, not just about where we are in a calendar year that we made up and has absolutely nothing to do with the natural world around us. So the other thing about some of these correspondences of the seasons is that they repeat. So if we think about the cycles of the moon, which is another sort of easy to observe, you have the new moon, it waxes, it becomes full, it wanes, and then it's new again. And if you think about what we just talked about with winter, spring, summer, and fall, and that the idea that the energy, it starts sort of cold and fallow or sort of closed and inward, then we get the energy of potential, a lot of action, and then sort of a falling away of action and turning back to internal. It's the same sort of correspondence are associated with the moon. So the new moon is when things are sort of corresponds to winter, right? Things are slower. It's about the internal. And then the waxing moon is sort of this potential for growth. And the full moon is when the energy, if you will, is at its highest. Side note, that may also be related to the fact that the light of the moon, of course, is a reflection of the sun energy. So it sort of makes sense that the full moon, when the moon is at its brightest, it is reflecting the most sunlight at us, which makes it very similar energetically to the summer solstice. Awesome, right? Listen to all those cycles. So I want to also talk for a moment about how these cycles of the year, which we see across many different cultures, kind of adapt the mythology, maybe adapt the celebrations or their approach to living within the cycles of nature, how that's relevant to us in the modern world. And you know, before I mentioned, hey, when I was a kid, maybe when you were a kid too, we were kind of ruled by the school year and some of the key holidays and some of the expectations. So I grew up in the Northeast, so, you know, sledding and ice skating in the winter, but lots of staying inside. And then spring, everybody kind of tumbled out of their houses. And then summer was lots of outdoor activities, maybe camp, maybe tennis at the park, swimming pools, and then the inevitable getting ready to go back to school. Now, for me, I kind of I didn't actually like going back to school, but I liked getting ready to go back to school. So I loved picking out things like my Trapper Keepers and my colored pens and stickers and folders. Like, I was a Lisa Frank addict, so if you grew up in the 80s, maybe 90s, you'll know what I'm talking about. But yeah, I mean, that was essentially the emoji of the 80s, right? The pattern that you got on your lunchbox and Trapper Keeper and all of those things. And there was something very satisfying about that preparation. Now, as an adult, there's no natural marker because I work all year long. But that said, there are markers to the year. So there are holidays. There are also secular things like Super Bowl Sunday, and New Year's is actually a secular holiday, right? And speaking of New Year's, one of the things that I love about New Year's is what I loved about back to school, which is that as the year turns, we're in a season of thinking about things. I absolutely love getting ready for the new year because every year I assume, because I'm that way, that this is going to be the year that I set all of the goals and I am super organized and I pick out my new calendar and I pick out my new journal and I figure out, what is going to be my system in the new year. And then as the clock actually turns over, then I get to put it all in action. And there are other markers of the year, but what is sort of interesting too about these markers is that depending on what traditions, habits, or cycles you have in your life, they end up becoming markers of your life, not just markers of the year, because as they sort of are these predictable cycles, then what varies from year to year becomes distinct. It sort of helps shape your experience. And so as we think about that, in some cases, these things can stand up and become rites of passage, right? So true life markers which, there used to be more formal sort of rites of passage of going from childhood to adulthood and through various stages of adulthood. Now we essentially have graduation, getting married, if you get married, having babies, if you have babies, your first apartment, your first house, when you first get your driver's license. There are these small moments that they become life markers, but are they celebrated? Because to me, that's sort of the difference between something that happens and something that is life-changing, and that you would really say, yes, on that day I became an adult, or on that day I realized my life path, or on that day I realized who I was in the context of my lineage. So the rites of passage are sort of cultural cycles or habits or rituals, if you will. And I think one of the interesting things about this modern life is that we actually get to create our own, right? Because I think it was Molly Roberts who said in her wonderful YouTube video about rocking your grimoire, which is when I first learned about gesso, by the way, and art witchery, which was total game changer. Altered book art, total rabbit hole. Anyway, what Molly Roberts said was, it's meaningful if you give it meaning. And oh my gosh, let's unpack that for a second, because if it's only meaningful if you give it meaning, first of all, that means you can dismiss a whole lot of stuff that you don't actually care about, because just because it's meaningful to someone else doesn't mean it's meaningful to you. But the other thing that you can take away from that is you can choose what you give meaning to. You can make meaning in your life. You can make meaning in your life. And so if you decide that, what you want to have happen when you do your New Year's planning is, instead of setting resolutions, you are going to make it into an absolute festival, a riot of flowers, and you're going to plant all the seeds of all of the amazing things that you're going to cultivate and bloom through the year. You can make that meaningful. Or you can just say, yeah, like if I don't get a new planner, then I will miss all of my doctor's appointments and all of my children's piano recitals. So you can make it practical and have it be low meaning, or you can load it with meaning, which I just think is so magical and so freeing, and I love that. Okay, I just keep side noting us onto all of these little sidetracks, which is lovely, but I want to come back to the idea of season cycles and rituals. What have you experienced? What do you experience on a regular basis that you find meaningful? What are seasonal cycles that you think are just happenstance of where you live or in what culture you're in. If you had your druthers, what would you say that certain seasons bring you, or that you would want to release with the seasons? And how do you decide what you are going to make be meaningful? So with that, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we will talk more about how this moves simply from what is seasonal and what is our culturally significant cycles into how can we use these things to make our lives more magical. What's up, Mystics? This episode is brought to you by the word serendipitous and this poem by Shel Silverstein called This Bridge. This bridge will only take you halfway there, to those mysterious lands you long to see, through gypsy camps and swirling Arab fairs and moonlit woods where unicorns run free. So come and walk a while with me and share the twisting trails and wondrous worlds I've known. But this bridge will only take you halfway there. The last few steps you'll have to take alone. It is awesome that you have joined us for this episode of Mystic Praxis. We would love it if you would subscribe and join us as we bridge many worlds in our explorations and play in all things mystical. You can find us via our RSS feed, which is hosted by Libsyn. You can also find us everywhere you find fine podcasts, such as Apple, Google, Stitcher, and Spotify. And we would also love it if you get the time, if you want to drop us a line, you can email us at mysticpraxis@gmail.com. You can also find us online at mysticpraxis.com and on Instagram and Twitter. Okay, we are back, and the question here is, okay, we've talked a bit about seasons and cycles. And now the question, though, is in addition to sort of being able to make meaning, what could we do to leverage what we know about cycles and rituals to make our lives more magical and make them more fun and make our whole lives more meaningful? So what I want to check in about too, though, is what is the difference between a ritual and a habit? Because I feel like this is sort of an interesting thing to get shifty about in our mind. Meaning, can we choose how we want to define these terms in a way that serves us? And so what I mean is, I kind of think that rituals are really just habits, but they are habits and activities that are infused with intention, and attention, actually. So if we think about intention-infused activities, that separates it from just things that we do by rote, by things that we do on autopilot. And of course, there's lots of things that we do every day that are essentially on autopilot, but would it make them more pleasurable? Would it make them more satisfying or meaningful if we simply loaded them up with intention? So an example of something that could be a habit or could be a ritual is daily affirmations, right? Like, Stuart Smalley, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, gosh darn it, people like me. Or more seriously, I am powerful and I am going to have a wonderful day. Like, good affirmation, right? You sort of just align your mind to what you're going to do with that day. How about meditation? Meditation, where you sit with your thoughts or you simply do breathing exercises. Is it a spiritual activity or is it a personal development activity? Does it really matter? If you make a habit out of it, is it a meaningless habit? Probably not, because it's specifically about mindfulness. How does it make you feel, though? Do you feel better when you do it? Do you feel more joyful, more relaxed? Do you feel like you are more connected, which is one of those words that tends to come up a lot when we are doing things that are mystical or meaningful, is this idea of feeling connected. How about your morning workout? If you are a morning workouter or work out any time of day. Me personally, I love to dance, and I do it because it completely clears my head. So on the one hand, by the way, I would really like this to be a more consistent habit, but is it just a habit? Can we load it with even more meaning so that when the activity is completed, I not only get the benefit of the habit, but I also get some additional satisfaction and joy out of it, some additional inspiration out of what I myself have just achieved. One example that I quite like is the first coffee of the day. So there was a show many years ago called Ally McBeal, where in one of the early episodes, the characters kind of had this ritual that they did when they had their first sip of their first latte of the day. And they took a moment and they paused and they took the first sip and they enjoyed the heck out of it. And I just always thought, how lovely is that to take a moment and really enjoy something. Just give yourself the moment. Take that time back out of your day, that 1 minute of the expectation of the first sip, the scent of it, the feel of it, the taste of it, the warmth of it, and that secret knowing that experience is just for you. I just think that's so yummy. So I still remember that episode. They made it very notable. And so it's one of those things, though, that always stuck with me is that, okay, sure, haha, it's these silly folks getting so much enjoyment out of something simple, but isn't that wisdom too, to be getting so much enjoyment out of things that are simple and or choosing to do simple things and allowing yourself to feel the enjoyment? So what do you look forward to? What would make your heart expand even for a second? And sort of kind of this is something I think is kind of interesting is, does it feel more juicy, to get more zazazoo if it is something that is secret, if it is just for you, if it's your quiet little joy, your first sip of coffee, or the square of dark chocolate that you kick off the day with or end the day with? Like, does the secret make it a little more special? I'm actually kind of curious about that, because I think some of these things are about connecting with other people, like, morning workout. I love my my workout buddies, right? But other things like that my affirmations, let's say, or my first coffee of the day, it's really just for me. And so I think that's interesting if we take the time to design our habits and rituals, to think about what about them we can shift or change in order to maximize what we get out of the habit/ritual. So I mentioned that I absolutely love setting up my planner, and it really, around New Year's, I'm actually less into resolutions than I am into simply getting organized. And it is really funny how I feel like this really did evolve from that childhood love of the Trapper Keeper and the 5-star Mead notebook, always college ruled. But now as an adult, I prefer graph paper or the dot grid. But in any case, while the actual medium has changed, I suppose, from a 5-subject notebook to a, what is this? A Moleskine weekly planner, the medium size, which is, I must have it. I have tried to deviate, but it always comes back to this. It's not just about the getting organized, obviously. There's an aspiration there. And also I think that there is joy simply in getting it just right? Having the right size, shape, color, options around stickers, stamps, pens, and it's this idea that it's going to help me create something even better. So the getting the planner and the ritual around setting it up, if we describe it as a ritual or cycle that happens every year, the getting it together is much easier than using it day to day. Sometimes I forget, but I actually get most of the joy out of setting it up. And I think that this is a good example, though, of where sort of ritual or cycles meet habits and habit hacking. And so I want to recommend a book for those of you who have no woo-woo interest in this. You're just interested in the personal development side of things. The Small Moves, Big Change, I think is the name of the book, by Caroline Arnold. I know I got the author right. So check out that book. I thought that it was really interesting to consider how you can really change your mind, because that's what habit hacking is. It is about changing your mind, changing how your mind works. And habits, my hypothesis is now that the difference between habits and rituals is that habits are things that we do on autopilot. Habits are the default, and rituals are things that are infused with much more intent. And they specifically cannot be on autopilot. That's my hypothesis right now. But the thing that was interesting about the habit hacking, one of the major takeaways that I think will be useful to folks who are interested in making changes, whether you're interested in changing your autopilot behaviors or you're interested in designing, your new sort of ritual special moments that you're going to pick up, is this idea that behaviors cascade. And what I mean by that is the author talks in the book a bit about her morning routine. And she was, trying to get, let's say, I think it was something like she was trying to get out of the house at a certain time. And what she realized is that, she set up everything so that she could be successful in the morning. But at some point, she then realized that in order to make the change that she wanted to happen in the mornings and make it automatic, which is a key here, she had to actually back out and change her evening routine and change some of her defaults earlier. For me, the way that I experienced this is I was trying really hard to adopt a new morning routine, because I just feel like I crash around out of the house and I basically go from half asleep to at my desk, and it's not a very fun feeling. I wanted to have a little more space. Well, in order to have a little more space, guess what? I have to get up earlier. Guess what? To get up earlier, I need to go to sleep earlier. If I wanted to have breakfast ready quickly in the morning, it just helped things so much to have things set up and ready to go the night before. And so the point is, whatever time you get up, let's say you get up 6:30 at 7, that's the last time that, and you're not a morning person, that's the last time you want to have a lot of decisions to make about how you're going to get out of the house in 45 minutes, right? What's better is if you don't have any decisions left to make in the morning, you basically pre-made all the decisions, set everything out that you need to do so that you can just go through it. And that really is sort of the trick to habit hacking, is reducing cognitive load, meaning reducing original decisions that you have to make in order to get from point A to point B. Point A being, where you are, and point B being what you will be or receive post behavior. So, for example, if you're trying to work out in the morning, what you need to sort of decide before it's morning time that you are going to work out and set yourself up for success down the road. So I just thought that was a really interesting concept and a huge takeaway for me in my sort of personal development and habit hacking journey, which is that that these behaviors, they truly do cascade. And so you can beat yourself up over and over again for never finding your keys in the morning. But, what would be really helpful is if you set up a habit to put them in the same place when you get home, which is another example I think that the author provided. Very useful. So sort of trying to wrap up a little bit here. Here's the thing about making changes. You need planning and you need practice. And until it becomes automatic or automagic, I suppose, given the context of this podcast, you're going to be most successful if you figure out ways to make the behavior that you're trying to get to muscle memory. And the way that you do that is you need to figure out how to make all of your decisions sort of ahead of time so that you set yourself up for success and you don't have to make a lot of decisions in the moment. So basically, habit hacking is the process of kind of committing to an outcome and starting to program your brain. And ritual is very similar. You are committing to an attention, and maybe you are starting to program your brain, but you are also adding in lots of extra intention and meaning so that in addition to getting the outcome of a particular behavior, you are also getting meaning out of the behavior. And that meaning leads to inspiration, creativity, joy, peace, connectedness, all of the things that we are reaching for beyond simply, say, sipping a sip of coffee or completing the workout. It's the feeling that we're going for, and that is a big part of what makes ritual different from habits. And so whether we're talking about habit hacking, or we're talking about creating rituals, or we're talking about leveraging seasons or cycles, we are talking about crafting change, which is pretty magical. Just this idea that, whatever you believe, whatever your orthodoxy, you can find practices to enhance your life by working with the cycles that exist all around you, whether they are natural, like summer, spring, fall, full moons, new moons, waxing moons, or heading into Leo season. You can kind of ride the energy of that in order to enhance your own experience. And you can also find ways and find little corners and pockets of simply what's going on around you in life, like the beginning of the workday or the beginning of the school year or a brand new planner. And you can find ways to load intention and meaning in, and out of that comes all kinds of benefits in addition to, say, caffeinating up or having a brand new Trapper Keeper or what have you. You also have the ability to create for yourself inspiration, joy, peace, connectedness, love, all good things. And that is magic. So with that, praxis on, my friends. Talk to you soon. Bye.